Hey everybody, welcome to the channel. Glad to have you here. Today we are going to be going backwards and look at some armies that I've used in previous battles pretty extensively, and just to continue this kind of army build slash tutorial series that I'm going to be doing. So I'm going to be taking you through my war herd, my Beastmen army, for fighting the Wood Elves, and my general Dwarven army, that if you guys have been watching the channel you have seen on a semi-regular basis, but just for those that haven't, I'm going to be tossing up this as a little army tutorial for two armies that I think are very good at what they do. So we're going to hop in here. So the key of this army is the main gore herd line with the fast movers. And so as an anti-wood elf army, you have to be very careful about tree men. A tree man only army, this army is going to be hard to use against that. But from what I've seen, usually they don't bring a full tree man army, and if they do, you might have a bit of a hard time. But you saw, there's a video of me playing Sergeant Major in a game versus a very tree-heavy faction, and I managed to draw it out because Morgar's so tanky. I might have even won if the game had more time. But so I'll walk you through kind of what the idea is behind this army and what each critical piece does. So if you see why I'm setting up my troops like this, the most critical part of this army is keeping your encourage aura, this blue circle here, on all of your mainline troops, because otherwise they will rout very quickly and not become cost effective. And so you see Morgar is covering these three, and my Gore Bull would be covering the other three. And you can even probably spread them out more, make them more resistant to missiles, and still be able to cover them in the encourage aura. And so these guys will make this front line much better and last much longer than otherwise, than the other would. In the back here I have two Ungor Raiders, and these guys are important because for shooting trees, they're going to be your primary source of damage. And just for shooting flyers, and you have to remember they have stock, so they're not going to be seen until they're in range of the enemy. So it can be a good way to spring an ambush or punish an over enthusiastic enemy. And so definitely key part of this army is keeping these guys safe, and you can do that by having some of these Centaurs here in the back, or just having some of these Ungor spears in the back. So there's kind of two possible formations. You could have these spears in the back and one spear on the side. And so you would do the same over here. And so in this formation, you'd have some Centaurs out on the flank and some other Centaurs out on this flank. And you'd have a versatile, fast force that could flank around or punish the enemy for being slow. Yeah, and so these Ungor spear herd, you definitely don't want them to be engaged with melee troops if you can help it. They're primarily going to be for zoning out cavalry and for dealing with large foes. And so that's the only real way these guys are going to be useful, and just for slowing down enemy rushes, or if they break through your right flank, you can throw them in there to slow the enemy's advance a little bit. And so if you take a look at these two, you can notice I put one different Centaur on each side. So if you take a look at these guys have a huge blade in their hands, and these guys have a shield and a smaller spear. So these guys are going to be able to stop missile block. They have a missile block chance, so they're going to be able to stop 30% of all missiles that hit them in the front. And so that can be very important while fighting the elves. And so these guys will be primarily for holding down flyers and for dealing with skirmishers. And they're paired up with this larger sword variant. So these guys have great weapons, and so they're going to be primarily armor-piercing damage. And so they're going to do very good against other cavalry, at killing enemy flyers that land, at rear-charging tree men. All of those things you're going to want to use these guys for. Definitely a good unit and definitely expensive, so you have to be careful with them. And you can see by their low armor that they're not going to last long if you leave them in an extended fight. So you want to charge them in and get them out, and charge them in and get them out. Don't leave them anywhere for long. And so I pair up each of a different type here so that I can challenge anything that kind of comes to this flank and be fine. And you can see I have the same thing out here on this side. And so this is one formation you can take. And it with the spearmen covering the Ungor raiders. The other one you can take is you have your fast movers out here on the flanks, and you have your heavy hitting guys in the middle to protect your flank. So if like you're fighting the elves and a forest dragon lands in your Ungor raiders, if you send this unit up against that forest dragon, they will be very successful and do a lot of damage. And be able to keep them there, versus the spear will be able to attack them and then they'll just fly away. So both effective in their own ways, but these guys are definitely better at punishing them for landing in your back lines. And you can they move so fast you can kind of keep them very far out and they'll still be able to catch anybody who enters. So a couple critical things with this army as well. You want to start back as soon as far as possible. You can see here I have a 135 second cooldown, 235 second cooldowns, and a 90 second cooldown. Definitely not going to be able to get the full use out of those unless I'm deployed back and I take the battle in a calm and calculated fashion. So you want to start back and then move forward as your cooldowns decrease. And don't be worried about this guy here. He is very, 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 very tanky, and he can 1v1 most things, and if not win, at least stall. And you don't really have to worry about him too much. But then again, he can't really deal out that much damage. That's what the Gore Bowl is for. And so this guy, when he's in combat, he'll be giving a melee buff to all enemies nearby, and so it's helpful to have him engaged near your main line. And he can deal a ton of damage here. You can see, oh, this is the wrong guy here. So yeah, 420 damage. 280 of that is armor piercing, so definitely a hero killer right here. And he does 30 extra damage to large targets. And so if you send him up against a lord on a mount, he's going to do very, very well. You can see reasonably armored, but will start dying if you let him be just shot at. So try and get at their skirmishers and don't let them fire. You can see down here he has Slaughterer's Call. So it's active if in melee. It has an effect range of 5 meters. So if you have him in melee within 45 meters of the enemy, all those people around him get a +8 leadership, which is huge, and +8 melee attack. So just amazing ability here. Definitely want to bring this along. Blood Greed is also very good. If there's an enemy in 70 meters, then you get immune to psychology on himself. And so that can stop him from being terrified and scared off the field before he gets his full use. And so that just keeps him in the fight longer, and it's just very useful. And yeah, here you can see his Encourage, so he's given bonus to leadership. Yeah. So we did the Centaurs and the main line here of the Gore herd. You can see their Primal Fury. So if their leadership is up, they get all those bonuses. Right here we can see well, another integral part here is the Bray Shaman of Beasts. So you definitely don't want this guy to die. He's a huge part of your damage dealing core. With his Flock of Doom, he can put out a ton of damage and really help your main line push through and weaken enemies so that you can cast Spirit Essence of Chaos on them. And so between the Flock of Doom and then once they hit 20%, you wipe them off the field with the Spirit Essence of Chaos and turn them into a Chaos Spawn. You can do some good work like that in that combo. Yeah. Anyway, so you can go back in my playlists and look for Beastmen versus Elves, and you'll see this army in action and me trying to use all of its pieces. Essentially, you want to get as clean of a mainline charge as possible with your Gore Herd. Keep your heroes nearby to boost their leadership so that their passive ability remains active. You want to protect your Bray Shaman and your 2 Ungor Raiders, and you can do that with your Spearmen or with your Centaurs. And with the shielded variant of the Centaurs, your priority is lightly armored skirmishers to protect your Gore Bull. And with these guys, your target is heavily armored units or enemy heroes that are large. So like large flyers to stop them from getting off the ground. Yeah. Anyway, so I'll see you back in the custom battle screen to take a look at my Dwarf army to run through that. Hey, welcome back. So here we have my Dwarf build, and we will be taking a look at this. So it's 6 Dwarf warriors over here, and you put 4 in the front line with your 2 Rune Smith, Rune Lords combo here in the middle. Off to the side you have 1 Dwarf warrior, and off to the other you have another. You definitely don't want to be moving these guys. They are critical to stop them from enveloping your line, so you want them back a little bit and kind of around the corner to stop them from getting the attacked in the rear penalty in your front line. So here, then you place your long beards, one of which is the Grumbling Guard, right behind your main line to provide some armor-piercing damage to the middle part of your army. In the back, you want these miners to kind of be flanking, and you want your Dwarf Warrior here in the very back to just kind of hold down the back, the most expensive unit in the back, and it will help. Behind this line you have the Rangers, and in the middle you have your Grudge Thrower. Yeah, so we're forgetting one of the most important parts here, our Slayer, and you want them spread out as much as possible to limit the damage they take from ranged fire and artillery. And so you can see very compact formation. We'll pause here and we'll show what I'm trying to do. Very helpful tip with this army is you press Control and then you press an arrow key and your army will shift. And so it keeps everybody in formation and you can move quickly without causing a big ruckus. And so why I'm playing this video right now is just to show you something that is important with this army. So look, if you look here, watch the yellowness of my troops. So you can see this rune is going to hit my entire main line, my Rangers, my artillery, and my Slayer. But what's most important is your line is not too thick and too long that these runes cannot hit your entire front line. You really don't care about the 2 Dwarf Warriors and the 2 Miners on the side. But you need this center of your army to hold up and to survive. And so it's important that all of those guys can be fit, and all of those guys are glowing when you hover over this rune here. And so let's go take a look at these abilities. So the Master Rune of Oath and Steel adds 30 armor, and the Master Rune of Negation adds 44% damage resistance. So that's 30 armor and 44% resistance, and this is plus 15 armor, so plus 45 armor when combined, and plus 22 damage resistance. So that's 45 armor and 66% resistance. Your front line, while these are going, are not going to be going anywhere. They can fight anything, and they will hold up while under these runes. And so, very important that they can hit all of your front line, because your front line is what's going to win you this battle. Yeah, and just these runes of Wrath and Ruin, you want to use these on the armor-piercing troops of the enemy. The armor-piercing and preferably armored portions of the enemy army, because your dwarf warriors will not be able to dish out enough damage by themselves to kill them quickly and effectively. And so putting the Rune of Wrath and Ruin on the armored, armor-piercing individuals in the other army is the best way to spend that damage. And definitely it will work better against units that have more units in their unit. The more the more enemies in a unit, say against the greenskins, it will do more damage than against a cavalry unit with much less units in it. And so that's important for these guys here. And you can see even standard die is going to hit all these guys. And so add 36 melee defense onto that. Already impressive defensive stats, and they're going to be very unkillable. The goal of these flanking forces is to die as slowly as possible. And so don't really mind these guys. Just use them to protect your rangers at all cost. And so these are going to be a very critical part of your army. They're going to be shooting at large targets and harassing as the main line engages. They're going to be firing at flying lords. They're going to be firing at anything skirting around the edges of your army. And you've noticed that in some of my battles, when the main line is engaged, I start moving these guys out, but only when I've kind of dealt with the flanking forces of the enemy. And so once you're able to do that, you're able to pull these ranges around and start shooting into the flanks of the enemy to just help. And so with the rangers' help, your flanks can win. And so it's a very critical part here to start using these guys offensively, and about halfway through the battle they become less useful, and so you can start kind of throwing them away or using them to distract the enemy while you win other fights. And so another use of these guys is, if you see in my previous videos, they do have stalk, and so they're hidden until they're in range of the enemy. So if they, for some reason, bring a bigger artillery field, or they bring more artillery than you, you can use these rangers to sneak up and try and even up the skirmishing phase and put it into your favor, because the enemy won't see them coming, and you can do a lot of damage to an artillery unit pretty fast when you have 1 or 2 units of rangers moving forward and ambushing them, essentially. So those are the use of the rangers. These Longbeards, you're just going to want to charge them straight in, and so I have them in this long line so that they'll be doing damage to everything here, and they'll help these dwarf warriors deal with armored individuals, and kind of even up that fight. And their encourage aura is useful for when your heroes die, because eventually they do. So you can see down here they also have some buffs from the runesmith himself. So in this particular army, I would potentially be expecting ranged troops to be firing at me, so the Master Rune of Grugni is very helpful for that. I also have the Master Rune of Groth One Eye, and so that'll buff their leadership even more and make it very unlikely that they'll rout off the field. And then this Master Rune of Stromny Redbeard, definitely the best one. It adds 8 to their melee attack and really, really helps make dwarf warriors actually decent. because you can look, it like gives them an extra third essentially. Oh, here, and this is important. The Rune of Hearth and Home off of my Rune Lord gives these guys immunity to psychology. And so that can be very helpful against like when you're fighting the vampires and they're trying to terrify your army. If you have immune to psychology, terrifying creatures or creatures who have the terrifying trait will not affect your morale. And so as long as you're in this circle, you will not be terrified. You can see here, this is too far, and he just has the Master Rune of Stromny, I think. Yeah. So, be aware of your auras and where you send your leaders, and that's why I barely ever move them around. These Dwarf Warriors, very useful for handling cavalry in the back lines, and also for filling up holes that appear in your main line or one of your flanks. That's what you use these guys for. And use these Slayers, of course, for flanking cavalry, for landing lords, for protecting your ranged troops. They're also very good against low armored, low cost units like swordsmen. They can do a lot of damage to, or spearmen. They will do good against, but put them up against anything else and they'll start to suffer. So definitely be careful there. And I bring this Goblobber here because it is very accurate, because it's a Regiment of Renown, and because of this Discouraged here. And so even if your main line is engaged, you can be shooting over your own line and putting this leadership penalty onto them, and it'll help route them as quickly as possible, essentially. And so definitely my favorite one to bring, and it costs as much as a cannon, so not that big of an expense, but can definitely change the battlefield. And with this, again, you want to be targeting the armored, armor-piercing units on the other team. So hopefully this has helped kind of clarify two of these armies that you've seen previously. And thanks for watching. That's that.